Excuse me. All right, y'all, we are back to our old ways. For some of you, you're gonna be like, great, that again. And some of you are like, okay, yeah, I was finally kind of catching on. So now I'm back to something that I know. Anyway, yeah, back to p-value, back to the null and the alternative. Back to, is this statistically significant? All that fun stuff. So this dot plot that you're looking at is the dot plot that we used back in Unit 4, and it was the runs scored by the National League and the American League teams. So here is the mean for the American League, and then here is the mean for the National League. All right, and so for our test stat, we are just going to subtract those, just like this. Okay, so we're going to take the means and we're going to subtract American League and National League. All right, so American League was 774.6. And it's time to go home. 774.6 minus 733.8. This will be our test stat, and it is 40.8. All right. So now let's see if we remember how to write out our null and our alternative. Okay, so I'm going to pause for just a second up here and see if you remember how to write those out. There was some words like same ability, greater ability, hint, hint, hint. Okay, so let's just get on with it, Miss Sweatman. All right, so I would say something like the American League, I'm going to abbreviate. American League teams had the same ability. Remember those words? And then what are we doing here? We're talking about the runs that they scored. To score runs. And then we're comparing as the National League teams. Okay, so same ability. And then for our alternative, we see that the American League had a higher mean than the National League. So we're going to say the American League teams had not the same, but the greater ability. Okay, so we're back to that. Greater ability. And then we'll say to score runs than, they had a greater ability than who? The National League teams. Okay. All right, so it's all coming back to us now, right? Sure. All right, so let's look over on the next page here. So here are the results of 100 trials. Notice my little box over here. Okay, each dot represents the difference in the means. So somebody subtracted the difference in means, simulated 100 times, and now made it into a dot plot. So notice a negative value means that in a particular simulation, the National League scored more runs than the American League. All right, so this is 100 trials. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 dots. This is over here. Look at the 4 dots, 4 dots, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 out of 100, that's our p-value, 0.04. Okay, so because this is very close to 0.05, we're going to repeat our simulation for 10,000 seasons. Don't worry, I won't ever make y'all do that. But you know, it is sometimes if it is close to a significance level, one way or the other, like maybe 0.06 or 0.055, 0.04 if it's close. Sometimes, depending on the situation, we might run the simulation again for more trials, like in this case, 10,000 trials. All right, so let's see that. And here's that histogram. Oof. Okay, so that is 10,000 simulated seasons. Okay. If I ever were to give you a histogram, obviously I would not make you figure out how many dots or how many differences were in our simulated season. So I went ahead and figured that out for you. Okay. And that ended up being 521 that were at or above 40.8, our test stat. All right, so 521, that's how many, if we were looking at a dot plot, that's how many dots there would have been. 521 out of our 10,000 trials. Let me get my calculator real fast and tell y'all what that is. 0.0521. 0.0521. Okay, so barely above 0.05, which is our cutoff. 0.0521 is definitely above 0.05. So here is our conclusion. Okay, and a lot of y'all try to rope this in with interpretation. So since our p-value is not small, it's greater than 0.05. Anything 0.05 and higher is considered not small. Since our p-value is not small, we do not have evidence that the American League has a greater ability. Okay, so we do not have evidence for the alternative. Okay, and what I'm doing here is I'm just restating what we wrote over here. Okay, we don't have evidence that the American League teams had a greater ability to score runs than the National League teams. I'm restating that. Okay, 0.0521, that means no evidence for the alternative. Okay, that's my interpretation there. P-value is not small, no evidence for the alternative. Then in the conclusion, I actually go through and state the alternative, or what we didn't have evidence for is the alternative. Here was what the alternative was. We do not have evidence that the American League has a greater ability to score runs than the National League teams. I guess I should have put teams in here too. Okay. All right, so that is just a quick recap over our null and our alternative and how we write that out. Okay. One thing to be careful about is causation. So even if we had been convinced that the American League has a greater ability, this wouldn't prove that the presence of a designated hitter is the actual cause. You know, there's always lots of variables at play. All right. So let's see if we can try this example on our own, and then I'm going to put some of the answers up for this. This is still kind of going back through the same thing, writing out the null, writing out the alternative, the test stat. So I'm gonna let y'all try this, and I'll put the answers up coming after this, okay? All right, cool.